Recording. I'm recording.
Okay. Hey friends, welcome back to the table, a church planting journey. My name is Trevor, and as you can see, we're joined, well, if you're watching, you can see, but if you're listening, we are joined by another good friend and a guest. I've got Ryan to my left on the screen that I'm looking at, and below us is our good friend and the co-host of the Millennial Pastor podcast. That's right. The big thing that I talk about at the end of the podcast that's really long and it's hard to say, the Millennial Podcasting Pastors Network. I don't even think I got that right this time.
Millennial Pastors Podcasting Network.
I flipped the words, but yes, it's just a lot of words there. But this is the man, the myth, the legend, and we thought that we would have him on to discuss life, ministry, where we're at with things. But again, before we get into any of that, let's check in. Let's see how we're doing. Like we said in the last episode, we are going a few weeks on, few weeks off here because we're crazy busy. So Ryan, what's good with you? What's new? What's happening?
Yeah, I've slowed down a little bit since last time. I feel like I'm not as busy anymore. I'm kind of getting the hang of the new job, kind of the schedule, if you would. And then, some things are exciting. This is my last month at my previous church, so I'll be finishing up there at the end of May, which is both exciting and sad, but at the same time we're not moving anywhere, so it's not like I can't see these people on a regular basis anyways. So and then for everybody who's been listening, kind of since we started this, I think I've been living by myself. My wife and kids are out in Missouri, living near my in-laws. And I just booked my ticket the other day to fly out at the end of May to go pick them up and drive them home. So they're coming back. A little bittersweet because my father-in-law still isn't doing very well health-wise, but we're excited to be together as a family again still.
For sure. I get that. Well, Josiah, everything is new for our listeners, for you, but what's up with you? What's new in your life? What's going on? I mean, keep it Reader's Digest, because we will talk more in depth in a little bit.
Well, I've transitioned. I went from a ministry role that was more traditional and conventional to one that's a lot less traditional, conventional. And I've been in the midst of a move, trying to sell a house, trying to buy a new place, and try to find some sort of normalcy. 2020 and the pandemic has been crazy. Got lots of kids dealing with COVID, homeschooling. My wife's a nurse, just so many things. So lots of things that are new for me, but with no one, potentially no one listening to your podcast. Like, okay, cool. Like, I didn't know that it was anything different. So that's nice.
Yeah, I feel it. Not a lot has changed for me. My sister gets married this month, and so we'll be heading to Tucson to celebrate that with her fiance, future husband. Means I get to see my brother, which I haven't seen him in a while because he lives in Oklahoma, so it's exciting. My toddler can say sup, so that's cool because we were in Fry's today picking up flowers for my wife's birthday, and he goes sup, and I go what? I go, did you say sup? And he's like, sup. So we were saying that back and forth. So he learned that word. I don't know how or who he learned that from, but whoever taught him, thanks. I appreciate it.
Teach him the word fam afterwards.
Yeah, there you go.
Sup, fam. My almost 2-year-old, he says no biggie now. He just goes, no biggie, and then he walks away.
I love it. Yeah, other than that, everything's been good. Both my cars have had to go to the shop. Currently, I'm driving the smallest clown car in the world. It's called a Chevy Spark. Google that for a second if you haven't seen what one of those are.
That's
but it's
really small.
Literally the smallest cars I've ever driven. It's a rental, while my other car, it's actually Durango, so it's like a truck, a big car, versus a Spark. Took me a sec to get used to that on the freeway. Every car seemed to shake me as they drove past. So other than that, life's good. Work is, I'm transitioning. I start 911 this week. So I've been taking admin calls. So people calling the non-emergency. So officially I'll be taking those life or deaths. See how that goes.
Yeah, no pressure.
No pressure. Nothing at all. Well, cool. Well, like we said, today we are joined by a good friend, Josiah. He is the author of a book called The Millennial Pastor, and soon to be an author of a second book. Spoiler alert. He is.
It's in the works.
It's in the works. It's in the works. He is a podcast co-host with Byron, who we've been on the podcast with before, of the Millennial Pastor podcast. He started this network that we've joined upon and been awesome. Before now, he was pastoring at a little small church in Washington, and now you said, and you kind of teased it a little bit, but now you are doing something a little non-traditional. You're testing the waters of ministry. Is that a good word to say? I don't even know.
I'm exploring. I'm entering into the unknown. So I'm still in Washington. We moved laterally, so we didn't go north or south. We just went east about 2 hours. So we were once upon a time. If you look at a map of Washington, there's the big triangle. I'm gonna try to do it because it's video. The big triangular peninsula thing.
Yep.
On the far west side of Washington. That's the Olympic Peninsula. We actually owned a house on that peninsula, but just barely. Where I pastored was basically at the base of the peninsula in a small town called Shelton. And I was the pastor there for 5 years, the lead pastor, but more honestly, I mean, it's a generous title because it's just like the only pastor is more accurate. She's like, I'm the pastor. I would regularly, I was 28 when I started there. And I would regularly have people come in the doors like, where's the pastor? And like, oh, me. Hi. It's like, no, not the youth pastor. Okay. Where's the, I'm like, no, it's really me. Like, are you qualified to do this? I'm like, it's kind of like it's too late to ask that question, ma'am. I'm here. I'm doing it. So whether or not I'm qualified, that's kind of an afterthought at this point. But now I'm just about a half hour east of Seattle, up in the Cascades. Pretty beautiful, pretty amazing, in a small community called Snoqualmie. And doing some slightly different stuff, some less traditional stuff. But it's it's at the very beginning. Lots of hopes and dreams and goals and plans, but it's a shift. It's a substantial shift. And I mean, quite honestly, frankly, if not for this opportunity, this is probably extra. I don't know how blunt I want to be, but I don't know how else to be. I was struggling with even wanting to continue being a pastor, to be honest. I was struggling genuinely with wanting to continue in denominational ministry because of the headache that was the culmination of things all dumped on to the 2020 that we all experienced.
Yeah.
So
I totally get that. And it's like, I've had to say it to myself so many times that the reason I can't leave is because I want to help be the change. I feel the frustrations and the hurts, and there's so many people that, probably listening that have felt that in some capacity, or maybe they're currently feeling that. And I'll be the first to say, if you haven't heard it before, but I'm glad that you're still with us, Josiah, that you're still kicking with the Nazarenes for now. And yeah, I mean, that's what's crazy is it looks different. What we're all kind of doing. Ryan said it before we started recording. You're kind of planting a church. You're not, like, the church is already established, but like kind of. And so
there's a lot to it. Yeah, there's a lot to it. There's some teamwork happening that's unconventional, but it shouldn't be. There's more than one church that has joined forces. Both of them are Nazarene. And so they resource one another. We actually already over the summer have plans, and they already have done this. I've always called them and asked them, like, how did you pull that off? What did this look like? And I always loved what they were doing. But they'll take turns with the pastoral staff sharing preaching responsibilities across the two different churches. They're distinct, separate churches, but they just do so much together. So in the end of May, beginning of June, I will preach at one location, and then the next Sunday I'll preach at the other location, because we'll be preaching the same sermon series but staggered a week apart. So after the end of 6 or 7 weeks, they will have heard 5 different pastors across both locations, which I think is just super cool. But from this sort of teamwork thing, there's all these creative juices flowing for what it looks like to do something unconventional, non-traditional outside the four walls of the church. So between the district's initiatives that are going on up here on my Western Washington, it's Washington Pacific District, and between these two churches kind of just dreaming, there's new endeavors that are being dreamed up. And yeah, the thing that's probably hardest about it is really hard to define. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd call it a church plant. I don't know if I would call it just being the church. Just it looks different. There's so many ways to slice it, but it's refreshing for me. It's very refreshing for me because, man, 2020 was not great.
Well, I know it's hard to define, and it's hard to label, I guess. But what could you just kind of give us the dreams, hey, this is what our goals are, this is what we're trying to do. I mean,
so they have
I think I was just gonna say real quick that the thing that Trevor and I have learned in the last 6 months is like, you can say you're gonna do one thing all you want, but like actually,
yeah, it's kind of different.
It's usually different. So.
I agree. I mean, I've seen that. I've watched your guys' journey. It's been insightful and educational. So between these two locations and for a couple years now, they've had a symbiotic relationship. They've had really cool synergy. They've had shared goals: reach, grow, impact. And so reach, that could be, I don't know what Christian buzzword you really want to attribute to, but similar to evangelism, maybe. Grow, similar to discipleship, and impact, basically service, right? Missional outreach, that sort of a thing. So in real kind of practical terms, I'm the impact piece. I'm the impact pastor. That's my title. But that impact thing, there's continuing to be some deconstruction because the word pastor denotes certain connotations in most people's minds. Because they seem to think, and I'm not saying the place I'm at, I'm saying maybe maybe mostly across this country. I'm not sure about other countries because their pastors have to be a lot more creative with resources and jobs and stuff. But the term pastor a lot of times means you're in a building, you have an office, you're there 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, you're there on Sundays doing things. Part of the goal is to broaden the imagination of the congregation to see church as bigger than the four walls they sit in on a Sunday morning. And so there's some practical steps that are being taken to just almost de-emphasize what can sometimes be a spectacle, right? Sunday morning can oftentimes just be this production, this experience that is full of sacred cows. I even had a couple pastors that I put on the spot on my podcast that said, do you think sometimes the sermon can even be a sacred cow? We got some flack because they said yes. But that, even just the sermon, even things that are very well intentioned, can be a distraction even because of what they turn into. So on a Sunday morning, we're in the midst of this right now. We're shifting some of what happens on Sunday mornings. We're doing some think tanking. We're doing some brainstorming. But the main big first step is doing more things as that same group of people, only outside the building. So creating an actual transition potentially on a Sunday morning. The hope would be potentially we have some worship gathering, and then, not even skipping a beat, but we go from worship in a building to, hey, we're going to, I don't know, we're going to the school down the road because we are going to do a community field day and put on a barbecue with water balloons, just something very simple, practical, but it makes that first initial step. So that's kind of the traditional engagement that I have. But the non-traditional, unconventional, organic side is that we're also working through this. I guess it's a program, but I hate that language. It's called Communities on Mission. It's kind of this proof of concept that has been going for about a decade in Germany. And the gist of it is how to do church without a building, right? How to do church without owning real estate. So that is going to be a big thing that continues to be developed by me and the pastors I'm on staff with. but the end goals are to create organic discipleship communities that are not dependent on that sanctuary in that space. And the idea is to assimilate and figure out where third spaces might be. And if you're unfamiliar with the term third space, it's the idea that you got home is your first space, work is your second space. And once upon a time in culture, church was the third space. They kind of had the, they owned that third space, but now culture has decided it has different third spaces. On some Sunday mornings up here, it's Seahawks. Like, you go to the stadium, that's the third space. Or during the week, it's a mall, or it's a park, or it is whatever it is. And instead of trying to own the spaces, instead of trying to compete with our space is better than your space, what would it look like for us to just join the people that are already gathering and not have to like be hype beasts, right? And like put on the coolest parties and get the coolest things going. But in practical terms, so much of this is still being developed, because what maybe worked in Germany isn't going to fully translate over here. Just like what you guys are trying to do, like, how do you create this network of things that you've never actually done before, and you don't even know what the obstacles might be before you even start, right? So
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, there's two big pieces, but there's a third big piece too. I actually primarily am employed, if you look at money and sort of resources and stuff, by a nonprofit. I took over as the executive director of a nonprofit, and it has a very close relationship with these churches, but it's basically a benevolence that helps with rent assistance, with gas, with all sorts of kind of gap monetary needs. And at the height of some of the COVID stuff, it was providing 650 meal bags, like backpacks full of food, a week to school-age kids that they could take home over the weekend. Basically, we're trying to partner with the schools, the kids that needed lunch assist and breakfast assist because of who knows why. We want to make sure over the weekend they also had food. If they needed food during the week, they obviously need food during the weekend. So there's just a lot of moving pieces with sort of the end goals are what a beautiful marriage it would be for us to have all these folks that wanted to worship through serving, right? They wanted to gather and be discipling one another in maybe traditional settings, maybe non-traditional settings, but then there's this vehicle of service that does just incredible good for the community. And it's a nonprofit that the former pastor helped get to where it's at now, and it's incredible. Like, I just feel like I'm walking in stealing credit for stuff I didn't do. It's awesome.
I understand. I like what you said about the sanctuaries in the third space. And I've been actually thinking a lot about that concept and idea of, for so many years, my concept of like the tabernacle was a place at Camp Pine Rock in Prescott. And the concept of a sanctuary was the church building I went to in Oro Valley. Like, when you said those words vividly, I can picture those two places, because that's what they were called and that's what they became. And then you mentioned this third space and kind of how, as we're planting this house church network, and I've made the mention before of like, oh, welcome to the sanctuary, as I like direct my arms at the living room for our church. What if instead, and I mean, this is like, I'm kind of like processing this out loud with you guys right now. So viewers, I'm sorry. But what if instead of it being the place where the sanctuary is, and I know, we've got scripture, we can deconstruct that if we want right now, but what if wherever you went, wherever the third space was, became the sanctuary? And so if it was the Seahawks game, that's fine, right? Or for us, the Cardinals game, like, let that become the sanctuary. Not that you're worshiping the Seahawks or the Cardinals or the cheerleaders or the coaches or whatever, but like that you bring Christ to those places, that if you go and the park becomes the sanctuary because you bring it. It's not because the building was built and this has been dubbed and we like smashed a champagne bottle against the side of the wall like a boat, to dub it as this, but like wherever you went, the third space that you went to was the sanctuary, regardless of what its locational place was, right? And like pushing it now in my brain of this idea of this last Sunday, we spent 2 hours outside picking weeds and spraying grounds, with septicide to prevent weeds. And like, that's all we have. We have rocks and weeds in Arizona. Like that's about it, right? Cacti. We have lots of cacti.
In Southern Arizona, especially.
Yes. But like, we just did church. It wasn't, we had a small little devotion and a little bit of worship beforehand before we sent ourselves off to do that. But I mean, we ran into one of our, potential church members, Tina, and her son, and they were like getting out of the pool and they were all excited about, hey, like, let us know what we can do. We want to walk to Walmart and buy things for the church next time. We're like, you don't have to, but if you're going to, this is what we need. I don't know. So just this idea of like, what if we deconstructed completely our understanding of sanctuary, of tabernacle? And again, I have to say this. I have to say it. I am not anti-church. I am not anti-establishment. The way that we have church now, I love. That's what, for the last 29 years of my life, that's my understanding of it. And I don't think any of us, the three of us, are here trying or doing what we're doing because of any animosity necessarily. But we have an understanding that there's more. And I think maybe this more for me for a season right now is helping people deconstruct the sanctuary.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, I preached on it a couple weeks ago, the week after Easter. I preached about how Jesus, in many ways, reinvents this idea of holiness and being made clean. Whereas before in Jewish society, if you touched a dead body or something like that, or you touched an unclean animal, that uncleanliness transferred to you. And what Jesus showed us is that no, his holiness transfers to others. The bleeding woman who reaches out and touches the hem of his garment as he walks by, the leper, the blind man on the outside of the city, literally who's been separated from society, being made whole again so that he can go back in. Zacchaeus being called down from the tree and being restored to community. So I think, and oftentimes we've told each, and I preached this too. I said, we've told ourselves that going to a building or going to a service or going to whatever we call church, that makes us holy, when reality, when we go out into the world, we're what makes the world holy. And I think that's great. That's a great way of thinking about it. What do you think, Josiah?
Deconstruction, right? I think it's interesting, the examples you bring. None of it happened in a temple, which might have caused some strife with the Pharisees, because that was what Jesus did on the regular. But thinking of my own journey over the past 2 years, in 2019, I was crazy enough, and I was even warned. Said, well, once you preach on this book, you're gonna leave. I'm like, what? That's silly. That's a crazy old myth. But I preached through the book of Revelation, and I mean, there's something to that, maybe, I don't know. But I preached through the book of Revelation, and I had a similar benediction sort of mantra that I would say. So Revelation is a great reminder to be the church that Jesus called us to be, right? And with every chapter, there's so many crazy things you could focus on, but the gist of it is, hey, Jesus is coming back, right? And there's this stuff that's going to go down, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to compete for your allegiance. But the first couple chapters, Jesus makes it clear, y'all have gotten distracted, huh? Like, I thought I told you some stuff. You're supposed to be doing some stuff. What's the deal? And Jesus is always clapping back at people in a way Jesus does through the author, through John. But that sets the tone for the book of Revelation. And so every time we get through something dicey or crazy, I'm like, I don't know. Some people think this, some people think that. At the end of the day, is it really that important to know the crazy little particular symbolism things in Revelation, or is it important to be reminded that we have a job to do? And until Jesus' return, our job is to be the church. That morphed in 2020 into sort of like, because January, whatever, the first Sunday in 2020, I preached, and the sermon was, don't just go to church, be the church. And so I started to use that phrase, and it was because it was the thing that was bothering me. We hang our hats so much on a building that we go to, And part of it was honestly some resentment, because I was one of maybe 2 or 3 people that did most of the work on the building to maintain it and to care for it. At some point, I sat down with the board of that church and said, I can't be a caretaker first and pastor second. I don't mind doing stuff, but this is kind of getting out of hand, guys. And I lived next door, so it was just convenient for people to ask me to do stuff.
Yeah.
And I made the mistake of saying I'm the son of a contractor, so I have some tools and I know how to do certain things. But that led into 2020, and the real tension that many churches felt was, well, if it's not in the sanctuary, it doesn't count. So I just made it a point to say, yeah, that's silly. We are the church. We can still be the church. Being the church is not defined by those 4 walls that we can't meet in the way we always wanted to. To be brutally honest, it's part of what ended up making it clear that I probably needed to leave, right? Like, I was fighting that fight, and I had some other contributing factors that made that all the more clear that, hey, I think this is just a lose-lose situation for me. Not just ideologically conviction based, or, not just that, but also circumstantial personal stuff, like being married to a nurse who is dealing with COVID patients regularly and worrying about exposure risks, and having conversations above my pay grade with the denomination about the ramifications of something happening in a building that they technically own, right? And there's liability concerns and all that. But that common thread of just saying, hey, we can be the church even without that building. Because so many times the conversation would steer around and like, well, it's just not fair. They're taking away our rights to worship. I'm like, no, you just can't sit in that building without some masks on. Let's just go out to the park. We can do everything we normally did. Well, that's not the same. Like, you're right. It might be better though.
I don't really want my worship to be like shown, because I've been told it's supposed to be in private, and I'm a little embarrassed about how we sing in public. So let's do it behind the walls, not in the park.
Right. We don't want anything to be above board for the world to see. But I even, I was like, it doesn't have to be music, homies. We could just do a thing in the park where we feed people. And one of the coolest things that happened in 2020, when I was still lead pastor in a traditional kind of setting, was we fed kids. We did more benevolent ministry for teenage moms and for low-income families and for foster families than we'd ever done. And what was really crazy, kind of frustrating, but humbling at the same time, was we never had more community people that didn't technically go to our congregational gatherings join in. Like, the vast majority of people that helped with, whether we were feeding kids tacos or putting together Thanksgiving baskets or doing clothing drives or helping take care of teenage moms or doing foster care advocacy, like, during Christmas, we gathered presents for foster families to help them make sure all the kids got presents. It turned into this community endeavor where just neighborhood people would come by and like, oh, you're doing a thing? I saw it on Facebook. I'm like, well, why were you paying attention to Facebook? Oh, because of the last thing you guys were doing. It was really cool. So I want to join in the next thing. And that was cool. Awesome. I really loved that.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, I don't want to necessarily put it as this is the thing, but it sounds like through some of those moments, it's helped you solidify some of the future for this new ministry, and how, like, you found some real raw success. And again, like, how do we quantify success in the church? So often it's by numbers, people showing up in the building. But I mean, if you're telling me right now that you weren't successful in the middle of COVID, when random people that weren't attending your church were like getting plugged in and serving, you were feeding children, you were participating in these things that you were saying, like, that sounds like some big success that some churches would love to have, but they're like, don't want to, I don't know. I could go into that for a bit, but I won't.
Well, that's just one side of the coin, right? Because the other flip side is you're responsible to do what felt like, and I started calling it this, which maybe in hindsight, I could have been more tactful. I started calling it the country club thing, right? Like, at some point, the Sunday morning gathering, with its pomp and circumstance and spectacle, can become that, right? It doesn't have to be. Sunday morning is not inherently evil. I feel like I need to clarify that, especially since I've said this so many times in the places where I live. I'm now the guy that says this, right? Like I say it enough that, oh yeah, Josiah tried to kill the country club. I specifically use that terminology because for me, you know, on a Sunday morning, if you're sitting next to somebody and you don't know about their life, you don't even know their name, then what are you doing? Right? Like if you're there to worship and part of this church worship gathering, but you don't know the person next to you, you don't even know how to pray for them, you don't know where they work, you don't know their name, that's not really a community. It might as well be a country club. And so the tension for me through 2020 was, while I was pumping myself into this stuff, since the in-person traditional Sunday morning thing wasn't happening, there was a lot of conversations being had, and they were not entirely life-giving for me personally. And it started to paint a very clear picture for me, that, because to be fair, it wasn't smooth sailing. You know, there was a lot of things that were a struggle for me to be a lead pastor, and some of that might have been particular to that church. I mean, if you happen to be one of the handful of people that read my book, I go into detail about why in the world are you guys hiring me? And the joke was, well, it's that, or, you know, I guess we close. So why not take a flyer? Like, we got a bargain bin pastor, and you can't make it any worse, right? You can't. Like, that was kind of the sentiment that was shared, right? So it's not like I had my work cut out for me in some ways, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I oftentimes self-sabotaged along the way with just, you know, inexperience and being young and reckless and in that. But COVID really clarified some things, because while I was struggling with, man, am I really supposed to be this traditional lead pastor type? You know, even before COVID, I was preaching through Revelation, or I'd be talking about stuff, and, you know, I would get sometimes lectures or coaching from mentors. You know, pastors shouldn't talk about that, Josiah. I don't know how to not talk about that. I mean, like, maybe it's generational, homies. I don't know what to tell you, but I can't not do that. But then when you bring it in with COVID, and it becomes very clear, like, those that maybe talk the loudest, they're not even necessarily, I don't know, maybe they're on the board, maybe they're not. Sometimes what is really the most important in people's hearts comes out, and it's sometimes disappointing for me as a pastor. It's like, wow, so that's the most important thing. Now I have people that full on, they're like, I don't care about how we're feeding kids. Like, you asked me to wear a mask, I'm not coming here anymore. Like, wow. Well, that's a bummer. And it really made me start to ask myself, man, what have we formed in these people? Like, what has the church done as far as its endeavors to disciple? And so I asked some questions, not just of my board, but of the district. Sometimes it would get me in trouble. I said, if we really mean what we say with our mission of making disciples, then guess what? We're doing a real bad job. Like, if our Sunday morning is the main vehicle for discipleship, and this is what I'm being faced with, I'm being called a bad pastor because I'm following CDC guidelines or the denominational guidelines or the state law, and I'm not, I don't know, protesting for the First Amendment, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Like, if that's and it just, it snowballed from there. And I would say at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, I kind of was pretty close to just throwing in this towel completely. I mean, there's a lot of other things that happened in the midst of that. I fully had a mental breakdown. I had to take 4 weeks off because for the 3 or 4 months leading up to that, I was a one-man show producing online sermon and worship things, and videoing and editing and uploading and doing all that stuff. But then just the demand for, hey, do we care? Are we going to be culture warriors for, you know, whatever thing was happening on that particular month, because it seemed like it changed every month. But yeah, at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, yeah, I loved that we fed kids, but I also, it was costing me too much to try to juggle everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's Trevor and I know other people have had this conversation during COVID. Like, I feel like there was, like, at no point was there, like, good decisions to be made.
Yeah.
This one is less bad than the other. And understanding that, and I mean, I can mentally be like, okay, I understand that's the case, but then like actually, living it out, because in reality, you're going to get yelled at by somebody.
Yep.
Which isn't fair, but it is what it is.
Well, and I can't go into too many details, but there was a straw or two that broke the camel's back for me. And it stemmed from an in-person interaction. I gotta be really careful with this. There's some ramifications with it, but basically we had a thing happen at the building, and it was, I think I can say this part. It was actually a funeral, so we had to try to do some stuff in person, but because of some pent-up frustrations and some hard feelings and some stuff, there were points where I was worried I was going to have to call the cops for fear of my own safety. So, and just sitting there, I'm in a suit, and I don't revel in the fact that I was thinking, man, I don't have much mobility. Like if things go down, what am I doing? Just having to think through, can I run in this? Can I defend myself? What's going to happen? And that's just a bad spot to be in. And there was another situation too, that was an interpersonal issue that was going on. And so much of it stemmed directly, both of these different isolated events stemmed from stress not dealt with well, disagreements with leadership, the fact that people everywhere are having mental health issues, maybe trying to self-medicate. But it just dawned on me, I said, wow, if this is what I can expect from 2021, when I thought 2020 was bad, I'm good. I'm good. And so I actually technically resigned as lead pastor at the church I was at, without any real. So I resigned before I accepted another job, and the guys here were like, "Dude, you can't resign yet." I'm like, "No, I need to be done. Like, it's so clear. God has made it abundantly clear that this needs to be done." And like, "So are you going to work with us?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to go over there with you guys. I honestly am not sure if I have what it takes. Maybe I shouldn't be a pastor, or maybe at the very least, I'm pretty sure I shouldn't be a traditional lead pastor, or I don't have what it takes. Like, I don't fit that mold, whatever the case may be." So there was a month or two where I just kind of floated, and we discerned a lot. We talked a lot, me and my wife. We have 4 kids, right? So it wasn't like I was sitting around doing nothing. I was plenty busy with homeschooling and caring for children. But that was the other piece of it, is because of having kids and because of having a nurse that's my spouse, right? Like, we couldn't even be around people for fear that she was going to bring COVID home, and they were going to literally be the harbingers of death, because kids give germs to everybody. Yep. So, but I mean, I do want to make a clarifying point, because it's easy to say, well, if COVID didn't happen, you wouldn't be in this spot. And I don't totally agree. Because in my opinion, the reason why I was having these feelings about lead pastoring and even thoughts of walking away from pastoring, period, the reason I was having mental health issues, the reason why 2020 was so rough, wasn't because these problems came out of nowhere. Like, these were problems that have been there for a long time. And all COVID did was give us the benefit of magnifying the problem. Yep. And as I've said, I don't know, I probably even have said this on my podcast, it probably doused the problems in gasoline and lit them on fire, right? Like, it just accelerated all these issues, but the problems were there before COVID.
Yeah. Which is, I think that's 100% true. And I don't think it's a bad thing. Like, I'd rather, don't beat around the bush. Tell me what you don't like about me. Like, I'd rather like get it out in the open and deal with it than like kind of, just go on pretending as if there's no issue,
Absolutely. So yeah, the transition was one of, because so much of my concern was, I don't know that maybe it's my giftings, my spiritual giftings, maybe it's my personality. Like, I was told a lot of opinions, right? Like, you're saying, like, more opinions than I expected, were brought to the surface, and like, oh, so maybe it's just me. It's not you, it's me, right? The breakup line. So, but that was so much a part of this. And what I told the pastor at this new place, that was the pastor that hired me, was, hey man, you're kind of competing with the relief that it might feel to not have to worry about stuff like that anymore. And his retort was, yeah, but what if ministry could still be fun? And I laughed. I'm like, good one, dude. Because in that headspace that I was in, like, ministry sucks, dude. This is awful. Like, nothing I do, I mean, it's a lose-lose situation. And I didn't even create any of these problems. I'm just trying to make decisions to best navigate them.
Yep.
And the sad thing was, in that period of time and continuing now, it's something I still struggle with. I wasn't the only one, right? Like, I knew you guys had certain fun things that you have dealt with in the past, where it just seems like there's so many younger pastors up and coming who are put in more difficult situations, because it's kind of that, that refining moment for them. When you graduate from seminary, you're not given the healthiest, biggest church, right? You're given the churches that can afford you. And oftentimes there's something crazy like only 1 in 3 seminarians stick around after the first year in ministry. I've heard a crazy stat where there's just even within the first year, because of so many circumstances, those that have gone through the training and the education to go into ministry, and maybe it's because they're given the most difficult assignments straight out of seminary, their career as a pastor lasts maybe a year at best.
This is why I dropped out of college. I'm just kidding. No, I have much respect for my brothers and sisters who finished and graduated with master's degrees, and yeah, I feel it,
That's
man.
not me.
Me neither. It's Ryan. Ryan's the smartest guy in the podcast right now.
I just have a lowly undergraduate. I didn't go to seminary.
I feel you. I feel like so often we could utilize this space as that vent moment and get it all off and feel better for just a moment. But I think sometimes a better way to do that is to highlight what you're excited about, the joy that is coming, that you see it's on the horizon. So a few things, maybe it's just one, Josiah, but maybe a few things you can think of. What are you hopeful for? What are you excited about with this new ministry?
I'm excited about what could be a new way forward. Particularly, that's really giving me hope. That's the deciding factor for why I stuck around, if I'm honest. There's a lot of particular pieces to what we're trying to do and why, and some hopes and convictions and passion behind it. But there was something that I thought was pretty poignant. My DS at district assembly said, I guess at some district level thing, I don't know, I wasn't invited. I don't have district leadership like cred. It's not like I was excluded. There was a question posed: is this a blizzard or is this an ice age? And so if it's a blizzard, then you just hunker down and let the blizzard go over, and you go right back to normal, right? You take the snow off your sidewalks, and then you go back about your day like normal. Maybe you put chains on your vehicle for a minute, and then you take them off, and it's resuming. If it's an ice age, that means that everything's different. We have to adapt. We have to change. And so the question was posed to the district leadership, to people on various boards and committees and stuff. What do you think it is? Is it a blizzard or is it an ice age? And I was happy because I was not using that terminology, but at the district level in the middle of 2020, like, oh, we'll go back to normal soon. We'll go back to normal soon. And I kept raining on parade. I'm like, yeah, we're never going back to normal. So the sooner we can get that through our heads and process what that looks like, the better. But just a couple weeks ago, I guess the district has gotten there as well. And like, oh yeah, this is an ice age. Unanimously voted that we have to be innovative. We have to think outside the box. We have to be unafraid of kind of boldly going into the unknown and be brave. So the thing I'm most excited and hopeful about is the fact that a standalone nonprofit that functions as a benevolent fund and a church both decided that they could share a person, right? So I'm part-time in both, and there's overlap in both, but that's on purpose because the expressed desire is to be better neighbors, to love the community well, to help one another. The nonprofit needs volunteers, and the church has that, right? And the nonprofit also needed a space, so they rent some of the church's unused facility to do some of the things. So like this beautiful partnership that could be really interesting way forward for what it looks like to innovate, to be the church. Because it's funny now, I have this conundrum when I'm meeting people in public. It's like, do I introduce myself as a pastor, or do I say I'm the executive director of a nonprofit? Like what is it that I say now? Because sometimes, and I'm sure you two can sympathize with this, if you just tell someone you're a pastor too quick, then that's it. And a conversation, they don't want to talk to you anymore. Or on the flip side, they need to like prove their spirit cred, right? And share all of their favorite Bible verses or whatever. It's one or the other.
That's I've definitely had that a lot, where people are like, oh my gosh, there's this one time I went to church. I'm like, one time?
Yeah. Can we collectively exegete this passage? And I can tell you that I know the Bible really well. Yeah. But my excitement is the fact that people, are there's structures in place that could afford us the chance to have unique partnerships, to try slightly different things, to maybe mobilize our people to get outside of the four walls. That's truly, so if there's a thing that I'm most excited about, is not hanging our hats on four walls being the church. Like that's as simple as I could put it. That church is people, just like the cheesy Thor Ragnarok. What is the line? Oh man, where's the place? Asgard is not a place.
It's not a place. It's a people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as cheesy as it is, it's spot on. It's good theology.
Yeah. What do you I mean, this is like a sports talk show, like whatever your predictions are, it doesn't really matter. Nothing's ever going to there's going to be no answer. You're not going to have to pay punishment or anything like that. Like, what do you see kind of the role of church moving forward? So like if this is a blizzard, like what needs to change? And obviously you're trying to be a part of the, like, all right, well, let's think outside the box. But what do you think, we as the church need to do moving forward?
So Ice Age was I think the one that's more long-term. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
I got my cold. We live in Arizona.
The metaphors.
Yeah.
No worries.
Sorry, my bad.
So I don't want to be doomsday, but I'll just be honest. I think there's going to be less traditional churches quickly. I think it's in like the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be drastic shifts, drastic changes. You're going to lose pastors, and it's going to be like a double whammy, right? Of older pastors retiring or passing away, and younger pastors who are just over it. They're like, I tried really hard to have a seat at the table, and I was told to wait my turn, or that my ideas were crazy, or whatever the case may be. And so instead of seeing that as some sort of let's live in the past and fight for that thing that we once had that we love so much, what we can do is keep our eyes and ears open to see, because this is the one thing that I think 2020 taught me. If you just have some fresh lenses, you can see where God is at work. And even if it's not inside your building, it doesn't have to be just inside your building, and you don't have to get butthurt about that, right? Like if the thing that's really good that's happening isn't happening in your sanctuary or in your Sunday school classes, in your fellowship hall, is that really the end of the world? Is it maybe perhaps a humble thing to say, well, I would like to be where God is doing stuff, so I want to go over there and do stuff with those people. So I think moving forward, for twofold, for traditional congregations, I would simply say, do that thing, be slow to speak, quick to listen, right? That's in the Bible. What would it look like to maybe, I don't think people are going to ask you to do some crazy change of things. I don't think traditional church is fully going anywhere. I just think there's going to be less traditional congregations gathering. There might be less church buildings with more people in them. Maybe there will be some equilibrium like that. But on the flip side, I think that folks like you and Trevor, Ryan, are going to have to help pioneer and innovate and fail a lot. Like, I think that's the big part of this that's going to be hard. The way forward, you can look back at history. Thomas Edison failed a lot at making light bulbs, and then eventually he stole one from Nikola Tesla, right? Isn't that correct? That's supposedly what happened. I don't even know. But
Allegedly.
I think one of the biggest things that could benefit both parties, let's call it the traditional. I'm really trying to be careful, like not just say like the older folks and the younger folks, but let's call it more the traditional crowd and the ones that are maybe trying to innovate. I think what you guys have already done is really helpful. Is you can come in and tell stories, and maybe those folks, that's not their cup of tea, but they want to help financially, or they want to help at least pray for what's going on. But at the end of the day, I think the best thing we could do is keep trying, like just have grit and determination. And maybe it doesn't pan out. You guys already talked about this. Like, hey, it wasn't exact. Like, we had something in mind, then we had to change it, and then we had to change it again. If you look at that as successes versus failures, I don't know, that could be really disheartening.
Right.
But I think the simple pivot for us is, this isn't the first time this has happened, right? Like, we've gone through reformations, we've gone through cultural upheavals and shifts, and somehow the church continued to exist. It didn't always look the same. It didn't always carry on exactly the same things that it carried on before, but it's been around. The Christian church has been around for about 2,000 years, and it's gone through growing pains and iterations. So we have the benefit of history to look back on and maybe learn some things. And moving forward, we can kind of hopefully highlight the things that we're supposed to highlight, like the things that we believe, and that those beliefs should be central to our life's work and in the things that we're trying to do. And that if at the end of the day, we're simply trying to do that, right? Like, I preached on this Sunday. It was my first sermon at the new place. If you just take the Lord's Prayer into consideration, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. If that simple little line becomes sort of your rudder directing where you go, maybe initially you don't have success in something, but you're in the right direction, and that needs to happen. Because if we just take our toys and go home and pout and say, I don't want anything to change, we're dooming ourselves.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
and I think we can be just as bad. So, full disclosure, if we as the young stereotypical pastors are pitching fits about the traditional folks that don't want to change anything, right? Like, stop singing hymns, sing this songs. We can be the same way about our thing.
Oh yeah.
And not want to change our thing for what's next.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a value of recognizing that there's a reason why things are traditions, and that doesn't make them bad.
No.
But at the same time, there's a reason why some traditions die. There's things that used to be traditions that we don't do anymore for lots of really good reasons. And just understanding that, kind of balancing those two things for sure.
Yeah. No doubt. Well, man, this is good. I thought I didn't know exactly where we were going with it, and I like the way it went. Honestly, it was, well, it was like there's a lot that we could have talked about. There's a lot of the directions that we could have went. I think we went in a really good direction. Where can people find you, Josiah? Not necessarily the Millennial Pastor, but where can they find what you're doing up in the Northwest? How can they get plugged in, and if they're listening and they just want to get involved or watch the process? So
there's a nonprofit called Helping Hands Ministries, and it's in Snoqualmie. It's really hard to spell that word. Snoqualmie. But that's where it's at. And it's just helpsnowvalley.org is the website. So that's the spot. I just started a few weeks ago, so I'm still kind of overtaking online presence. So if you don't see my face on there, it's not because I'm a liar. It's because I'm still waiting to get like admin credentials for the Facebook page and for the websites and stuff. But then the church, so there's two churches that share a name, and I'm at the Snoqualmie one, but it's called Life Community, and it's in Snoqualmie. It's a Nazarene church, but it doesn't say Nazarene on the building, that was a big deal when that happened, right? Not too long ago. But those are the places that I physically exist within. Aside from that, I don't know. I mean, most of my social media has now become podcast network fodder, so I don't even
That's what I was asking about your ministry stuff, because we'll have those links down in the bio for people who want to click on over and give that a follow to watch kind of it'll be interesting. It's going to be watching a plant grow, and you set it out, you water it, you feed it, and you watch it. And so I think I'll definitely click on and give it a like so I can watch what's going on there. And it's interesting because, in this podcast, we're talking about specifically and how we're planting the table. It's kind of been our little audio journal for that. But, I love when we get to bring our guests on to describe what they're doing and where they're at and what they're going through, because though the table is unique in its structure, we are not alone in trying to innovate. And I've said it a lot in the last couple of weeks, but I can't not do this. I have to. And one of the big reasons is because I want my son and his children to have church. And that, I know it's going to look different. Like you said, he might go to the traditional, more brick and mortar, church, but I at least want to help innovate and create something that hopefully will last so that his children will have church. So I don't know. It might not be the table. I hope, but it might not be. It might be something totally different. Who knows? But I know I can't. I have to do this, and that's one of my reasons for sure.
Well, I think the thing that's remained the same throughout all of Christendom is that people gathered, right? Where they gathered, what it looked like when they gathered. I mean, that's the one tradition that we haven't stopped doing. And even, there's still Benedictine monks that have gathered in a very similar way for a long time. But the gathering itself, that's the thing that continues no matter what. So that's the name of the game, going forward. You guys asked me lots of questions. I'm going to leave this percolating. I'm going to be stewing on a lot of those, because full disclosure, I've tried to steal some of your guys' ideas on the down low and see how I could implement them.
Yep.
So thank you for that. I'm sure I'll have some more questions about, hey, when you got to this point, what the heaven did you guys do?
What next?
Yeah.
I love that. I love it. Well, the way that we like to finish our episodes, outside of the obvious plugs that every podcast seems to do, right, is we like to pray, or at least mention things that need to be prayed for, because we believe that, of course, the three of us here will be praying for one another, but we believe that our listeners as well, it's good for them, and they can be praying for us. The 20 to 40 people who tune in time and time again, we appreciate you. And I believe that you guys have prayed for us, and many, many times God has provided. So, Ryan, what can we be praying for you? And Josiah, will go to you next. I'll wrap that up. So what's up, Ryan? How can we be praying for you this week?
I think the big thing, just finishing well at my other position. And then also we're getting ready to soft launch the table, which basically means we're going to start having weekly gatherings. We've been doing weekly gatherings, but they've kind of been more trying to build up the team kind of mindset as opposed to, kind of just inviting everybody. So yeah, I think, pray for us as we begin to be church. Not to say what we've been doing hasn't counted, but as we begin to invite other people along the journey with us on a more regular basis, and then also just everything going on with my family, it's always good to have prayer for that as well. So
For me, we're still transitioning, trying to close on the sale of a house that we own. We currently live in a small little condo, and with 4 kids, that has been interesting. So we're trying to buy a place, but we're also trying to find a job for my wife, who is a nurse. And there's like 4 or 5 different great opportunities, but there's this weird indecisiveness. coupled with some of the better jobs don't start until August. So that could be a stretch to try to make it on a pastor nonprofit salary for a couple months. So that, just family and transitions, and kids going into school for the first time in person in a long time. There's a lot of interesting transitions and norms that they were once used to and got less used to, and now are going back. But then also, so much of this is in the works, but we have full on onboarding and training that we're bringing some of our folks alongside of us through to hopefully, this is the thing I would ask specific prayer for, is hopefully stir the imagination, right? Like that's really the hope, is to have a broader worldview, a broader perspective on what it looks like to be the church. It's pretty simple. So that's really going through the summer and kind of hitting the ground running with a lot of that stuff. And it'd be very helpful if we had folks that were just as passionate and kind of caught that imagination that we're helping along the way, that weren't necessarily paid to do that. So
I feel it. For me, I think this is a good month because as we ramp into this soft launch, kind of doing, like, I have a really normal schedule of the 10 to 8s, and I have my weekends free, so that gives me some time. But then we like launch into it with June, and I start my overnight shifts for the first time in my life I've ever worked real like consistent overnights. I've done late night stuff, obviously, being a youth pastor, with lock-ins. Oh, I hate those lock-ins. But just being able to transition and continue to be a good spouse and father and continue to be a good pastor. That's probably my biggest concern right now. But at the end of the day, God has always provided. I think He will, and we'll manage. And as I figure out this scheduling, rock and roll. I mean, we'll figure it out, I guess. That's the biggest thing for me. But other than that, like, God has been really good. I'm in a very peaceful time in my life right now, which is weird after this last year. We can all echo that craziness. Well, thank you for joining us, Josiah. We appreciate you being on with us today. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Of course.
I'm not normally on this end of the interview on a podcast, so thanks for the invite and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, not a big deal.
Yeah, check him out, the Millennial Pastor Podcasting Network. How many podcasts are we up to now?
I think we have 6, or we're about to have 6.
About to have 6. What's the 6th one?
There's a couple there's some brand new baby podcasts that I'm still trying to encourage to go public. Maybe, is that how you would say that?
Yeah, I feel it.
Yeah, so
they can do it.
I think, do we have we have 5 right now, almost 6, right? Is that where we're at?
We're definitely at 5 because we just added religious, so some good stuff coming down the pipe for sure. But yes, you got to follow the Millennial Pastor Podcasting Network, where specifically you can find Josiah Jones, the Millennial Pastor, with his co-host Byron. You can find the beautiful, amazingly, wonderfully talented pastor's spouse, my wife. And hopefully she'll have some more guests on, but she's in that same boat of finding those people and finding the time to do it. We have good friends over at A Plain Account, and our brand new our brand new show, Religious, which I cannot remember his name to save my life right now.
Jeff.
There you go.
Jeff Bassett and Brent Neely.
There you go. And so we got a bunch, so make sure you head on over there so you can listen to all the podcasts, especially now that we're not going to be posting every single week, so that there will be content for you to just subscribe and eat up as you prefer. And outside of that, you can follow us at The Table Naz on all of our socials, and at thetablenaz.church is our website. If specifically you want to support us in any way through prayer, maybe you have some questions or concerns or whatnot, or maybe you want to give financially, which is still a really big piece of our church plant, you can do that over at thetablenaz.church/support for all of those different options. DM us, hit us up. We'd love to have conversations with you. We've had so many great ones in the past. And I forgot to say this in the last episode, but we use Anchor, which is a really cool product. So you can like click the message button and leave us a voicemail, and we can listen to that next week. We haven't gotten those in a while. but they're fun.
Definitely. All right.